British Expeditionary Force, or BEF, in the company of what was left of the French army, was pushed west to Dunkirk Beach in northern France. 400,000 men were teetering on the brink of tragic defeat, and, quite literally, continental Europe. Most English generals would have considered themselves lucky to evacuate 30,000 troops. However, through the bold Operation Dynamo, which made use of civilian vessels, 338,000 troops were evacuated under withering bombardment. The incredibly successful evacuation proved a triumph for the British, who went on to win the war, a feat that would have likely proved impossible without their success at Dunkirk. On September 1st, 1939, the Wehrmacht of Nazi Germany invaded the Second Republic of Poland, more or less starting World War II. Shortly afterwards, the British and French declared war on Germany. Although little actual combat occurred in the following months, the stage was being set, primarily by continued German aggression towards the likes of Belgium and the Netherlands. After German panzer units bypassed France's formidable and yet poorly located defenses, the war actually started to heat up. Through the new tactic Blitzkrieg, Lightning War, Germany was able to take France with unprecedented speed, 46 days, which is very little time to occupy a country nearly 600 miles across, especially in 1940. This time, however, was well more than adequate for the deployment of nearly 400,000 British troops to defend France. As the Nazis pushed deeper into France, it became clear to the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, and his cabinet that a major evacuation would become necessary. Slowly, the BEF and its remaining French, Dutch, and Belgian company was pushed back towards western France. Once the Allied nations had been sufficiently pushed back, the advancing panzer units were ordered to hold back, due to fears of a counterattack on their vulnerable supply line. This gave the Allies sufficient time to establish a perimeter, although it was mostly guarded by French soldiers that would spend the rest of the war in POW camps. After some time, a feeble attack was launched against the waiting troops, but the bulk of the force was held back on direct orders from Adolf Hitler. This decision is arguably one of the worst strategic blunders of the war, but without the benefit of hindsight, it can be understood. The tank crews were tired after, driving across the entirety of France under fire. On May 24th, a halt order was issued, giving the Allied forces enough time to establish a perimeter large enough to prevent artillery from hitting the beach. On May 25th, 1940, the War Office decided to evacuate. Through the implementation of Operation Dynamo, 861 vessels were assigned to or commissioned for the task. Of these, only 693 flew the Union Jack. 243 vessels were lost, including a devastating 6 British destroyers. Another 19 were damaged. The port of Dunkirk had only one wharf, which is a dock for larger maritime vessels, making it an obvious target for the legendary Stuka dive bombers, equipped not only with high explosives, but a so-called Jericho trumpet to strike fear into the hearts of the troops. On the beach, troops waited in an atmosphere that many described as surreal, with a constant threat looming. The island of Great Britain was nearly visible over the horizon, and yet there was no clear path to reach it. Ship after ship was loaded, and ship after ship was hit. The Royal Air Force was hesitant to deploy any aircraft, fearing an all-out battle for Britain to come, and so the Luftwaffe had complete reign of the skies. Eventually, however, whether through dumb luck or incredible heroism, likely a mix of both, ships started making it back. The Luftwaffe had no mercy. When not dropping bombs, tens of thousands of leaflets were dropped, depicting the precarious situation and encouraging surrender. Where Germany saw foreboding an uncrossable sea, the British saw home. So, what is the impact of all of this? Well, at the time, much of the British ruling class was in favor of seeking peace with the Nazis to avoid the seemingly inevitable land invasion. Neville Chamberlain, the former Prime Minister, was in favor of peace talks and had even started the ball rolling before the perceived failure of the BEF in France was blamed on his incompetence, and he was forced to resign. Winston Churchill, his successor, however, held the at the time unpopular opinion that no peace would be had. Peace talks were already in the work when Churchill was confirmed. Churchill stated that wars are not won by evacuations. Regardless of this, the success at Dunkirk provided a massive spike of public approval for Churchill, especially following his famous speech where he claimed that Britain would never surrender. So why is all of this significant? Well, Churchill called off the peace talks and painstakingly went about making the best arrangements to help Britain win the war. Things would probably have turned out very differently for Britain had the operation gone awry, or had the Nazis advanced as Hitler ordered them not to. Firstly, one of Britain's largest bargaining chips going into any such negotiation, its army, would likely have been lost as prisoners or casualties of war. Next, Churchill would have likely been removed from office following the certain PR disaster that would have been a failed Dunkirk. His replacement likely would have been pro-peace, which would probably still lead to an invasion, as Nazi Germany didn't exactly have the best track record in promise-keeping. Before the evacuation, things were looking pretty bleak for Britain. Vast swaths of France had been lost, and the Nazis were closing in on Paris. Public morale was low, and America, despite sending material aid, was still overwhelmingly isolationist. The Soviet Union was allied with Germany. On all fronts, Britain was alone, or quite near it. The successful evacuation provided a glint of hope. After Churchill's speech, any hope of treaty or compromise was abandoned. They would fight. This fighting spirit, brought home from France and the evacuees and amplified by Churchill's famous speech, woke up the populace. Things started looking up. The Germans did not evade, for many reasons, among them the larger-than-expected army. Approximately a year later, the Nazis turned on the Soviet Union. 6 months after that, the Imperial Japanese attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, prompting a declaration of war the next day. While it would be foolish to say that Dunkirk won the war, it bought the British much-needed time and reinforced the Bulldog spirit, the spirit of refusal to surrender.